I found out my wife was planning a future I wasn't supposed to be in. And the worst part, I helped her build it. At the time, I thought I was being supportive and a good husband. The steady one, the man who doesn't ask for much and doesn't create problems where there aren't any. Turns out, that's a very convenient way to miss the biggest thing happening in your own house. If you had met me a year ago, you probably would have described my life as ordinary in the safest possible way. I was 43. Married for 16 years, one son in college, one daughter still at home, to a split-level house outside Charlotte with a sloped driveway, cracked mailbox post, and a kitchen faucet that made a whining sound every time you turn it too far left. My wife, Rachel, worked part-time at a nonprofit. I owned a small flooring business with 2 crews, 1 bad knee, and the kind of permanent mental exhaustion that makes you stare at red lights like they personally offended you. From the outside, we were stable, not flashy, not exciting, but stable. We had routines, shared calendars, separate coffee mugs nobody else was allowed to use, the same Tuesday taco place, the same quiet argument every winter about whether we needed to host Christmas again, the kind of marriage people envy when they're tired of drama. That's what I thought too. I thought calm meant healthy. It took me a long time to understand that calm can also mean nobody's saying the important parts out loud anymore. Rachel used to. That's what makes this harder to explain. She used to say everything, not in a loud way, not in a chaotic way. She just had that gift some people have where they turn a normal day into a story worth hearing. A woman at the grocery store buying 12 cartons of yogurt, that a strange voicemail from her boss, that a rabbit that kept showing up in the side yard like it paid taxes there, that she'd come into a room carrying small pieces of the world and hand them to you like they mattered. And when we were younger, I was good at receiving them. Back when we lived in our first apartment and the upstairs neighbor practiced trumpet like revenge was his religion, Rachel and I would stay up past midnight eating cereal from mixing bowls because we still hadn't unpacked the kitchen right. We talked about everything then: money, parents, kids we didn't have yet, who we might become, what scared us, what we wanted. I miss that version of us in a way I can't really say out loud without sounding like I'm grieving people who technically still existed. Because by the time this story starts, we were still married, still sharing a bed, still buying groceries, still asking each other whether we needed more laundry detergent. But something essential had gone quiet. Not broken, quiet. And quiet is harder to fear. My daughter, Emma, was 14 and a T that age where she could sound 25 one minute and 9 the next. Smart, observant, already too good at reading people's moods. Our son, Tyler, had just started his sophomore year at NC State, which meant Rachel had entered that strange season of motherhood where she was proud, lonely, relieved, and a little lost all at once. I noticed some of that. Not enough. That was my specialty, apparently. Noticing just enough to feel decent about myself. Rachel started volunteering for more things around the same time Tyler left. Extra events at the nonprofit, Saturday fundraisers, planning meetings, community outreach stuff I barely understood because I never really asked enough to understand it. At first, I thought it was good for her. I actually remember saying that to a guy I work with. Honestly, it's probably good. I told her while we were loading trim boards into the truck. Empty nest thing. She needs something that's hers. That sentence bothers me now. She needs something that's hers. I said it like I was generous for allowing it. Like marriage had made me the gatekeeper of her inner life. But I meant, well, that's the annoying part. Most of the damage I've done in my life came wearing the clothes of good intentions. Rachel seemed lighter for a while. Not more affectionate exactly. Just more energized. She started dressing a little differently for work days. Nothing dramatic. Just more deliberate. Earrings on a Tuesday. Lip color I hadn't seen in years. Blouses she usually saved for dinner out. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But men like me are weird about noticing that we see the evidence and then choose the least disruptive explanation. Maybe she was just feeling better. Maybe Tyler leaving had shaken her up, and this was her way of settling. Maybe she'd finally found a rhythm outside the house that made her feel like more than someone's wife or someone's mother. All of that may have been true. It just wasn't the whole truth. One Friday night, I came home later than planned after a client changed his mind 3 separate times about stain color, which, if you've never had that argument after 10 hours on a job site, can make murder feel like a reasonable hobby. Rachel was in the kitchen, laptop open, legal pad beside her, glasses low on her nose. She looked up when I walked in. You ate? She asked. On the road. She nodded. Okay. That was normal. Except, a year earlier she would have asked what I had, whether the client was still a pain. She would have made me tell the whole story, even if I was too tired to tell it well. That night, she just turned back to her screen. I stood there with my keys still in my hand, feeling that tiny, familiar sting you feel when someone stops reaching for you, and you realize you've built your whole comfort around expecting they always will. What are you working on? I asked. Event proposal, she said. For the nonprofit. Yeah. Another year earlier, she would have launched into it. Who it was for. What the goal was. Why the board was difficult. Why one woman named Denise apparently thought bullet points were too aggressive. But she didn't. Need anything? I asked. No, I'm good. I went upstairs, showered, came back down, and found her still at the kitchen table. Same position, same focus, same quiet. I sat across from her with a beer and watched her make notes in the margin of a printout. You're really into this stuff lately, I said. She smiled without looking up. Yeah. That was it. There are answers that close a door and answers that invite you through it. I had gotten so used to closed doors I stopped checking whether I was the reason they stayed shut. Somewhere around then, Rachel stopped asking me to come with her to things. Again, it didn't happen all at once. First it was, you probably don't want to sit through this. Then, it's just a bored dinner, nothing interesting. Then she stopped mentioning the invite part all and only told me afterward how it went. And then eventually she stopped telling me that too. I didn't fight it. That's the part I'm ashamed of. Because some men hear distance and panic that I heard distance and treated it like free time. No awkward small talk with strangers and fundraising dinners. And no obligation to stand around holding a plastic cup while Rachel did the social version of work I never fully appreciated. I told myself we had different interests, that marriage doesn't require overlap in every area, that this was adult life. I used adult life to excuse a lot of emotional laziness back then. Emma noticed before I did. Kids always do. One Sunday afternoon, Rachel was leaving for some planning meeting in town. Emma was doing homework at the island while I pretended to understand the instructions for assembling a storage shelf I absolutely should have paid somebody else to build. Rachel grabbed her bag, checked her phone, then looked at me. I might be late, she said. How late? Not sure. Don't wait up. Emma looked up from her notebook then, watching the exchange with that teenage stillness that means she's paying much more attention than she wants you to know. Okay, I said. Rachel nodded and left. The front door shut. Emma kept writing for a few seconds, then said, You didn't ask where she was going. I looked over at her. She told me. Meeting. That's not where. I laughed a little because I thought she was just being 14. You taking notes on us now? She shrugged. Eyes still on her paper. Just seems like you guys don't ask each other stuff anymore. That should have stopped me cold. Instead, I went with the easiest defense available. Your mother and I are fine. Emma gave this tiny nod that looked too much like resignation for a 14-year-old. I didn't say you weren't. Then she went back to homework. It's one of the worst things in the world when your child notices the truth before you do. Not because they're wiser, because they're forced to live inside what you refuse to name. That night Rachel got home after 11. I was in bed, but not asleep. She changed quietly in the bathroom, came in smelling like cool air and some perfume I couldn't place right away. Not unfamiliar, just stronger than usual. How was it? I asked into the dark. Good, she said. What was it? There was a pause while she put lotion on her hands. Planning dinner. With the board. I rolled onto my back and stared at the ceiling. Successful. Yeah. She got into bed, turned away, and within seconds I knew the conversation was over. The weird thing is, I wasn't suspicious then. Not really that I was displaced. That's the word for it. Like someone had quietly moved my chair away from the table where my own life was being discussed, and assumed I wouldn't notice as long as the room stayed warm. A week later, Tyler came home for the weekend. Rachel lit up around him in a way that made sense. But there was something else too. Something almost relieved, like his presence gave the house a center it had been missing. We had dinner together, and for the first time in months I heard her talk the way she used to. Not to me. To him. Stories, details, jokes, opinions, all of it flowing easily. At one point Tyler mentioned, maybe switching majors again, and Rachel asked a dozen follow-up questions before his sentence had even fully landed. I watched her then with this strange, private ache. Not jealousy. Recognition. There she is, I thought. There's the woman I kept telling myself had just changed. No, she hadn't disappeared. She had become selective. Later that night, Tyler was downstairs getting water when he found me in the den pretending to watch a game. He leaned against the doorframe and said, "Mom seems happier lately." I looked up. "Yeah." He nodded. "Busier too. Probably the nonprofit stuff." "Maybe." He opened the fridge, stood there a second, then added, "She talks about that one guy a lot." I felt something in me go still. "What guy?" Tyler shrugged. "I don't know. She mentioned him a couple times when we were texting. Some guy helping with donor outreach, or something. Mark? Mike? I don't remember." Then, because he was 20 and not yet trained in the ways adults swallow information slowly, he just grabbed a bottle of water and went back upstairs. I sat there in the blue TV light, suddenly wide awake. Not because a man existed. Nonprofits have men. Work has men. The world is full of men. It was the phrasing. She talks about that one guy a lot. Not to me. Apparently to our son. That bothered me in a way I couldn't quite justify yet. The next morning, I brought it up casually while Rachel made pancakes. "Tyler said there's some guy at the nonprofit you work with a lot." She didn't look up right away. Just flipped a pancake, adjusted the heat, then said, "There are a lot of people I work with." It was such a clean answer. Technically true. Emotionally evasive. "Yeah, but he mentioned one specifically." She finally glanced at me. "Ben." That name landed in the room harder than it should have. "Maybe," I said. "I don't know." "Who's Ben?" "Program director," she said. "Why?" No stumbled. No blush. Thought. No panic. Again, that made it worse. Because whatever this was, it lived in the comfortable space of practice normal. "No reason," I said. "Just curious." She nodded once and went back to the stove. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was the beginning of a kind of attention I hadn't paid to my own marriage in years. After that, I noticed Ben's name in places I might not have before. Rachel mentioning, "Ben said the venue won't work. Ben thinks we should move the date." Ben already handled that. Not constantly, but enough. Enough that the pattern formed. Enough that my brain started circling something my pride didn't want to touch. One Thursday evening, Rachel was in the shower when her laptop lit up on the kitchen table. I wasn't snooping that I want that on record. I was looking for the electric bill, because for reasons I still don't understand, we had become the kind of middle-aged couple who occasionally printed bills from the internet and then couldn't remember why. Her email preview popped up on the screen. Just one line. "Can't stop thinking about tonight." No sender name visible in the preview. Just the subject line and the first few words before the screen dimmed. I froze. Not because it proved anything. Because it didn't. Maybe it was about an event. Maybe it was a donor dinner. Maybe I was finally being exactly the kind of paranoid husband I'd spent years silently judging. But even then, even while I told myself all that, I knew something else. That line didn't belong in the life I thought we had. I didn't open the email. I didn't touch the laptop. I just stood there in the kitchen, staring at my own reflection in the darkening screen, feeling that old male instinct kick in. The one that wants certainty before pain, proof before confrontation, anything solid enough to stand on so you don't feel ridiculous if you're wrong. Rachel came downstairs a few minutes later, toweling her hair dry. "You okay?" she asked. And I looked at her, fresh from the shower, barefoot, entirely at home in a life I suddenly didn't understand, and said the dumbest possible thing. "Yeah, just tired." She nodded like that answer belonged to me more than any real one ever had. Then she reached past the laptop, closed it, and asked whether we were out of orange juice. That night, I lay awake beside her longer than I'd like to admit, listening to the air vent click on and off, waiting for my brain to settle. It didn't, because some part of me had already crossed over. Not into certainty. That comes later. Into fear. The quiet kind. The adult kind. The kind that doesn't make you yell. Just makes you start replaying the last 6 months like evidence from a trial you didn't know was happening. And the next afternoon, I found a thing that made it impossible to pretend I was imagining it anymore. The next afternoon, I didn't go looking for anything. That's the part one keep repeating in my head. I wasn't searching, but I wasn't suspicious enough yet to cross that line. I just noticed. Rachel had left in a hurry. Something about being late for a meeting. Phone call from the driveway. Keys, bag, quick see you later. Normal. Except she forgot something. Her planner. Not her phone. Not her laptop. The planner she carried everywhere. It was sitting on the kitchen table, half open, pen still clipped to the side. I wouldn't have touched it if it had been closed. That's what I tell myself. But it wasn't. It was open, and the page was already there. There's something about handwritten things that hits different. Text can be deleted. Emails can be explained. But handwriting feels intentional, permanent, like something meant to exist longer than the moment. I stepped closer, just to close it. That's what I told myself. But then I saw the name. Ben, written in the margin. Circled. Underlined once. That alone didn't mean anything. Not really. People write names all the time. Notes, tasks, reminders. But next to it was a sentence. Small. Almost like she didn't want to take up space with it. Don't mess this up. My chest tightened. Not all at once. Slow. Like something pulling inward. I stood there staring at that one line, trying to decide if I was overreacting. Because, technically, it still didn't prove anything. It could have been about work. An event, a deal. Something important. But it didn't feel like work. Work doesn't get written like that. Work doesn't get circled. Work doesn't sound like something fragile. I flipped the page. I don't know why. That's the moment I crossed from accidental to intentional. And I knew it. The next page had more notes. Dates, times, locations. But scattered between them. Small fragments. Not full thoughts. Just pieces. He notices everything. Feels easy. Why didn't I feel this before? That last one. That's the one that didn't leave me. Because it wasn't about him. It was about before. About something missing long enough to be questioned. And I knew, even before I wanted to admit it, that before was me. I closed the planner. Slowly. Carefully. Like I might explode if I moved too fast. And I stepped back from the table. The kitchen looked the same. Same light. Same counter. Same quiet. But it felt different. Like I had just walked into a version of my life I wasn't invited into. I didn't confront her right away. That probably sounds familiar by now. I had a pattern. See something, minimize it, wait. Because waiting feels safer than being wrong. And asking the question means you're ready for the answer. I wasn't. Not yet. That evening, Rachel came home like nothing had changed. Same routine. Bag down. Shoes off. Quick check on Emma. Then the kitchen. Hey, she said. Hey. I watched her. Not obviously. Just paying attention. She moved differently now. Not nervous. Not guilty. Just focused somewhere else. Like part of her was already engaged in something I couldn't see. What did you do today? I asked. She opened the fridge. Meetings. Planning stuff. Good. Yeah. Same pattern. Short answers. Closed doors. Dinner was quiet. Emma filled the space like she always did. Talking about school. Friends. Some teacher she didn't like. Rachel listened. Really listened. Smiling. Reacting. Engaged. I sat there watching it happen. And something clicked in a way it hadn't before. She wasn't distant. Not completely. She just wasn't distant with everyone. Only with me. That realization is different than suspicion. Suspicion is external. This was internal. Because now the question wasn't just, is something happening? It was, when did I stop being the person she shows up for? After dinner, Emma went upstairs. Rachel stayed in the kitchen, cleaning up. Same as always. I stood there for a second, then said it. I saw your planner. She froze. Not dramatically. Just stopped. The plate in her hand stayed midair. Water running. Everything paused. What? She said. Not confused. Just buying time. You left it on the table. Silence. Then she turned off the water, set the plate down slowly, and looked at me. What did you see? That question. That exact question. Not denial. Not what do you mean? Just, what did you see? That told me everything. I saw enough, I said. Her eyes dropped for a second, then back up. And in that moment, something shifted. Because she didn't try to explain it away. Didn't rush to fix it. Didn't pretend it wasn't what it was. She just stood there. Like the truth had already been accepted. Just not spoken. How long? I asked. Same question. Different story. She took a breath. A while. That answer again. Safe, vague. Not real. How long, Rachel? She looked at me. And this time, there was something else in her expression. Not guilt. Not fear. Something closer to readiness. A few months, she said. Months. Of course. It's always months. Never days. Never something you can explain as a mistake. Always something that had time to grow. And this isn't just work, I said. Not a question. She shook her head. No. Just that. No explanation. No defense. Just no. Are you seeing him? That's when it got real. Because that question doesn't live in gray areas. It forces a line. She hesitated. Just enough. Then, yes. Quiet. But clear. I nodded once. That was it. No reaction. No explosion. Just confirmation. Because at that point, the truth wasn't surprising anymore. It was just complete. How many times? I don't know. That answer again. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. I don't know doesn't mean not knowing. It means not wanting to define it. Do you love him? That question changed everything. Because it wasn't about facts anymore. It was about meaning. She looked at me. Really looked. And for the first time, she didn't answer right away. I don't know, she said. Of course. That answer again. But this time, it felt different. Because now it wasn't avoidance. It was confusion. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. I leaned against the counter and realized something I hadn't been willing to say out loud. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't one mistake. This was something that had been building. While I stood in the same house, thinking everything was just busy. What? I asked. That was the real question. Not who. Not how long. Why? She didn't answer immediately. She wiped her hands on a towel, looked down, then said, because it felt like someone finally saw me. That sentence landed harder than anything else. Because it wasn't about him. It was about absence. Mine. I saw you, I said. Even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Not the way she meant it. She shook her head slightly. No, she said. You were there. That difference. I had never thought about it. Being there. And being present. Two different things. And I had confused them for years. I tried, she said. And I believed her. Because I remembered. Every small moment. Every quiet reach. Every time she asked something deeper than surface. And every time I gave her just enough. To avoid going deeper. I didn't think it was this bad, I said. She looked at me. And her answer was quiet. I know. That one hurt. Because it meant the gap between us had been invisible to me. But not to her. We stood there. Two people in the same kitchen. Looking at each other like strangers who knew too much. Upstairs, I heard Emma moving. A door closing. Life continuing. Normal. Except it wasn't. Not anymore. Does he think you're leaving me? I asked. She didn't answer right away. And that pause said everything. Yes, she said. Of course. Because people don't mess this up about something casual. They write it about something they're choosing. I nodded slowly. Then asked the only question that mattered now. Are you? She looked at me. And for the first time, she didn't have an immediate answer. I don't know. That answer again. But now it meant something else. It meant she hadn't decided. Which meant she already had one foot out the door. And that's when I realized something that made everything worse. The planner. The notes. The messages. None of that was the real discovery. The real discovery was this. My wife hadn't just found someone else. She had already started building a life I wasn't included in. And I didn't even notice when I stopped being part of it. I wasn't included in it. That was the part one couldn't get past. Not even that there was another man. Not even that she had lied. Not even that she had already crossed lines most people pretend are impossible until they're standing in their own kitchen looking at the proof. It was the fact that Rachel had started imagining a future, and I wasn't in the frame. That does something strange to a man. It's not just heartbreak, it's disorientation. Because all at once, your memory turns against you. Every dinner, every normal Saturday, every trip to Costco, every night you fell asleep beside her thinking you were both still living inside the same life. And then suddenly you realize you weren't. Not really. She was already somewhere else, emotionally first, maybe logistically next. And I had been moving through the house like a man, checking smoke alarms while the foundation cracked underneath him. Rachel stayed by the sink, one hand resting on the counter, eyes lowered like she was tired of the shape of the truth now that it was out. I asked, does Emma know anything? Her answer came fast. No. That mattered to me, or maybe I wanted it to matter because there wasn't much else left to hold. Nothing. I asked. Rachel shook her head. Not details. She knows we've been off. She's not blind. But no, not this. I nodded once. Off. That word felt almost insulting now, like calling a house fire a heating issue. I sat down at the table because suddenly I didn't trust my legs as much as I usually did. Rachel stayed standing. Maybe that was appropriate. Maybe we'd already started becoming the kind of people who don't know when to sit near each other anymore. After a minute, I asked the question I hadn't wanted to ask because some part of me already knew the answer. Have you talked to him about leaving? That changed her face. Not dramatically, just enough. And once again, silence got there before honesty did. Rachel. She looked up at me. Yes, she said. There was no excuse that, softening, attempt to hide behind confusion. Yes, a whole marriage contained in one dead little syllable. I looked at the table, the tea, a water ring from somebody's glass, a scratch in the wood from when Tyler had dragged his science fair board across it years ago. Normal family damage. The kind you stop seeing until the whole room goes strange. What did you say? I asked. She folded her arms across herself. Not defensive exactly, more like she was cold. Nothing definite. I laughed once, low and tired. Nothing definite. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? She didn't answer immediately, and I could see her deciding how much truth a marriage can survive once it's already this wounded. We talked about what my life would look like if things changed, she said. That sentence made my stomach drop harder than if she'd just said, I told him I was leaving you. Because it was softer, more intimate, more sustained. Not a moment of recklessness, not a conversation. Possibility. Planning without calling it planning. What my life would look like. Not our life. Not the kid's life. Not the family. Her life. A separate category. I stood up and walked a few steps away because I couldn't breathe sitting still anymore. When I turned back, I asked, and what did it look like? She stared at me for a long second. Then she said the one thing I was not prepared for. Peaceful. That one cut clean. Not because it was theatrical. Because it wasn't. There was no drama in how she said it. No attack. No cruelty. Just honesty. And there are times when honesty is more violent than a lie. Peaceful. I repeated. Rachel's eyes filled then, but she held it together. I'm not saying that to hurt you. I nodded slowly. I know. That was the problem that I knew. Because for a second, just one ugly second, I understood exactly what she meant. Life with me had not been explosive. That would have almost been easier to name and fix. It had been draining, emotionally thin, predictable in the deadest way. Not a bad man, just a man she no longer felt alive beside. And then somebody else had come along and made her feel seen, interesting, chosen, whatever word you want to use for the kind of attention that enters a starving place and feels like rescue. I hated him. I did. Even before I knew enough about him to hate him properly. But I hated what I recognized even more. Because this wasn't a story where I got to stand cleanly on one side of the wreckage pointing at the villain. Rachel broke vows. She lied. She created a second emotional life inside our marriage and hid it while asking me if we needed milk. All of that was true. But another truth was sitting right beside it. I had spent years making stable, feel like loneliness with decent credit. Did you ever plan to tell me? I asked. That seemed to surprise her. I don't know. I almost smiled at the predictability of it. You say that a lot. Because I kept thinking I'd figure it out first. Figure what out? What I was doing. What I wanted. Whether this was real or just something I fell into because my life felt small. That landed too. Because it told me she had, at least at some point, understood the difference between truth and hunger, between love and escape, between a person and what that person represented. And did you? I asked. Her eyes met mine. No. That was the most honest answer of the night. No. No. She had not figured it out. No. She was not in control. No. None of this had a neat explanation that would let either of us sleep by the end of the conversation. Upstairs, I heard Emma's door open. Both of us went quiet immediately. Then, footsteps, slow ones, teenager footsteps, half dragging, half announcing. She appeared in the hallway a second later in oversized pajama pants and one of my old t-shirts, hair tied up badly, phone in hand. She looked at us once and stopped. Teenagers don't need many clues. They can read a room faster than adults because they don't yet have the ego to explain away what they see. What's going on? She asked. Rachel answered too quickly. Nothing, honey. Why are you up? Emma looked at her, then at me. That didn't sound like nothing. Nobody spoke. And in that silence, I watched my daughter understand more than I wanted her to. Not the facts, not Ben, not the planner, just the emotional geometry of the room, the distance, the tension, The way both her parents looked like they had stepped out of the same life but ended up in different houses. "Are you guys fighting?" she asked. I hate that question. Hated it in that moment. Hate it now. Because kids ask it like there are only two options: peace or fighting. They don't know yet about the worst thing: the slow death. The rooms where nobody yells because everyone has already given up on being heard. Rachel walked toward her first. "We're just talking." Emma didn't move closer. "Mom." Just that point, one word. But there was too much intelligence in it. She knew Rachel was lying, or at least editing. I stepped in then, because there are moments when being the father matters more than being the injured husband. "Hey," I said. "Come here a second." She looked at me carefully, then came halfway. "Did something happen?" she asked. There it was. Not what, just something. I looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at me. And in that second, I understood the real twist in this story wasn't the affair, or the planner, or even the future I wasn't part of. It was this. Children start carrying the emotional cost of adult silence long before adults admit there's a bill. I kept my voice steady. "Your mom and I are having a hard conversation. That's all." Emma's face tightened a little. "About what?" Rachel stepped in softly. "About us." That word made Emma go still. Not because she understood the details, because she understood enough. "Are we okay?" she asked. There was again the same question kids ask when the ground under their house starts moving. Not "are you okay?" Not "what did someone do?" "Are we okay?" That question reaches past blame and goes straight to the structure. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to protect her from the uncertainty, from the shapelessness, from the adult truth that sometimes families don't break in one event, but in years of emotional neglect followed by one person finally becoming vulnerable in the wrong direction. Instead, I gave her the only truth I had that night. "We love you," I said. "None of this changes that." Emma held my gaze, then looked at Rachel. Rachel's face broke a little then. "Never," she said. Emma nodded, but she didn't look convinced, not fully. Kids can smell partial truth. They just don't always have language for it. She stood there another second, then said, "Okay," in that flat teenage tone that means absolutely nothing is okay, and went back upstairs. Neither of us moved for a while after that. Then Rachel sat down finally, across from me, and somehow the whole room felt worse. Because now the damage had an audience. Even if she didn't know the details, even if we'd technically protected her, she felt it. And maybe that's what finally burned through the last of my denial. Not Ben. Not Rachel's confession. Not the idea of losing my marriage. The fact that my daughter had already started adjusting herself to something neither of her parents had the courage to name in time. After a while, I asked, "Are you willing to end it?" Rachel looked at me like she already knew which I meant. Not the marriage. Not yet. Him. The outside door she had been leaning on while this house went quiet. She didn't answer quickly, and that delay told me more than words could have. "Rachel." She exhaled slowly. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel right now." "That's not what I asked." "I know." "Then answer it." Her eyes watered again, but she didn't look away. "I don't want to lose everything at once." That sentence sat in the room like smoke. Because buried inside it was the truth. She did not see him as a mistake to cut off. She saw him as something real enough to grieve. Maybe not a forever future. Maybe not certainty. But real enough that ending it felt like a loss. And once that's true in a marriage, you're no longer arguing with an idea. You're standing between your spouse and an attachment. I nodded slowly. Then I understood. The planner note, "Don't mess this up." I had thought she meant the affair, or the secret, or some dramatic turning point. Now I saw it differently. She wasn't warning herself not to lose him. She was warning herself not to lose the version of her life where she still got to choose. If you're listening to this and your relationship feels off, not toxic, not explosive, just quietly wrong, don't wait for proof. Don't wait for a planner left open on the kitchen table. Don't wait for a subject line you weren't meant to see. Don't wait until your spouse starts imagining a peaceful life that doesn't include you. Most people think marriages end when someone cheats. Sometimes they end much earlier. In the years where one person stops feeling known, that I end the little daily dismissals, that I end the comfort of routine, I end the version of stable that slowly drains all intimacy out of the house and calls it maturity. Rachel betrayed me, that's true. But the reason it terrified me so much wasn't just because there was another man. It was because by the time I found out, my wife wasn't deciding whether to have an affair. She was deciding whether the life she had with me was worth keeping at all.